Welcome to Terrible Lizards, a podcast about dinosaurs with Dr. David Hone and Izzy Lawrence.
On this week's episode, we discuss everything Oviraptorosaur. Plus, Eleanor Morton joins us to ask Dave how to move like a dinosaur.
Welcome to episode 2 of series 6 of Terrible Lizards. We are back again for another week of joy. Say hello, Dave.
Hello, Dave.
Hey, that is Dave doing an impression of Hal.
9,000.
Exactly. So, what we talk about today, Dave, once again, Dave has not told me. I can tell you that we've got an amazing guest coming up, which is the magnificent Eleanor Morton, who is, I believe, this week, so I'll put it up now. If you're listening to this the day it comes out and you're in Leicester, go get tickets for her show. It is on this week. Just Google Eleanor Morton. Other than that, what we talk about, Dave?
Oviraptorosaurs, which I think we've mentioned a bit, but we've definitely never really done an episode on them.
We've mentioned them a lot, and they came up when we did that special where we looked at, what's it called? Dinosaur Planet 1977.
Yes, they did.
They were in that, but they weren't in that. They were kind of almost Oviraptors, but...
And they've also come up because when we did Gigantoraptor, there's a suggestion that Gigantoraptor are an odd offshoot of the Oviraptorosaurs, which they may or may not be.
That's because they've got the weird face.
Yes, I suspect they probably are. As with most things, or at least far too many things, we don't really know for sure.
Do you want to do a what Izzy knows about Oviraptorosaurs? And it literally can't even say the names.
Yeah,
what Izzy knows about Oviraptorosaurs and what is actually, and then you can just correct me and call me an idiot.
Yep. Okay. So starting now.
Okay. Oviraptorosaurs were originally called that because they thought they were egg stealers because they found one near some eggs, and then later on we think that they're actually their nest, and so they're not stealing them unless it was an evil Oviraptorosaur stealing another Oviraptorosaur's eggs. They've got really weird faces, which is they've got the weird sort of like beaky face, but it's not really a beaky face. It's kind of odd. They are bipedal and they are associated with eggs. The end.
Not bad.
Thank you.
I think we can add a little bit more.
Okay.
So let's start with the really basic stuff. Yeah, so Oviraptorosaurs are, I would say they're the first kind of group of dinosaurs, or first group of theropods that are really very, very bird-like indeed. Everyone kind of knows about dromaeosaurs and troodontids being right up there, right of the kind of origin of birds, and you've got things with feathers and various degree of bird-like behaviours in things like tyrannosaurs and ornithomimosaurs and alvarezsaurs and theropods, but it's the Oviraptorosaurs which are like about as birdy as things kind of get. And also, at least a few of them are very, very big. There's the strikingly unoriginally named Gigantoraptor, which is very large. And that, that's tyrannosaur size. That's a big, big animal, but would still, as far as we know, be fully feathered and proper bird-like feathers with a shaft down the middle and bits coming off it. They would absolutely look an awful lot like cassowaries and emus and even more derived than that in terms of their feather structure a lot of the time.
I'm really confused because I thought that feathers were primarily in the sort of Archaeopteryx-y, theropody.
Well, there's all kinds of filamenty stuff obviously knocking around, but it's the Oviraptorosaurs, dromaeosaurs, troodontids, and birds that are particularly modern bird-like, as in the living birds around today, feather-wise. And so that's why I say they're the kind of first group of that. And yeah, if we go back to, so there's these famous Central Asiatic expeditions from the American Museum of Natural History that were going out to China and Mongolia in the 1920s. They're famous for all kinds of reasons. They were going out to look for early humans at a time when we thought that a lot of early humans were coming out of East Asia. What they mostly found were things like the first dinosaur eggs and velociraptor and oviraptor and some fossil birds and some very early fossil mammals and a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of this was done by a guy called Roy Chapman Andrews, who I don't know if you've come across, but is incorrectly famous for being the inspiration for Indiana Jones, because he's not the inspiration for Indiana Jones, even though lots of people think he is.
Who is the inspiration for Indiana Jones?
I don't know, not Roy Chapman Andrews.
Okay.
Well, so the reason people tend to think of that is...
Did he get squished by a boulder?
A big boulder, no. But I think it was the Boxer Rebellion, because I don't know my Chinese history very well, apologies. But, was in Asia in the 1910s, 1920s, definitely got caught up in uprisings, and there were shootings and escape on horseback, and there's lots of photos of him out in the desert, and he's wearing a Stetson, and sometimes he's got a pistol, and he wrote stories and articles about his stuff, you can see why people have made that mistake. But
it's the hat.
Yeah, basically, he's a guy who looks quite rugged and stands in the desert with camels digging a hole in the desert. You can see why people got that impression, but by all accounts, Spielberg and Lucas have no idea who he is and have been asked to go, who? So probably not. But yeah, the big team from the American Museum of Natural History, a whole bunch of expeditions, found a whole bunch of really important stuff, including the first dinosaur eggs and including finding what we would now call Oviraptor. And yes, the assumption at the time was this was an animal eating eggs. It's got big clawed hands. It's got a big sharp beak. At least one specimen was found with eggs, ergo they're eating eggs. And then this has become one of those legendary dinosaur misconceptions. Oviraptor didn't steal and eat eggs. I am pretty sure that Oviraptor did steal, eat eggs because it's an almost perfect animal for doing that. So it's the misnomer is probably
over here. Come on, Poirot, you don't know that. You got to prove it.
No, we don't. But as discussed,
we need a fireplace and gather all the Oviraptors in one place.
Yes. Carnivores have varied diets. There were lots of animals nesting out there. It would be, and even herbivores, as we discussed, and omnivores will eat eggs on occasion. I would be surprised if on occasion Oviraptor didn't eat eggs. So it might have been misnamed in the sense that original specimen wasn't nicking eggs, but I bet it did sooner or later.
Fair enough. So that's when it was found, and everybody. So when did it discovered that it wasn't eating eggs? When was that an immediate thing?
I think I strongly suspect that idea got dumped in scientific circles fairly quickly for not actually having any decent evidence. But it was really the specimen known as Big Mama, which is a dinosaur sitting on a nest of eggs, and those eggs are immediately in range, and that's another Oviraptorosaur. In this case, I think it's a thing called Citipati, Citipati. It was kind of nailed it on. And subsequently, we found a whole bunch of specimens doing that, sitting on eggs. We found eggs with embryos in them, with Oviraptorosaur embryos in them, which is kind of a giveaway. A lot of the famous work done on dinosaur brooding and dinosaur eggs and dinosaur embryos are Oviraptorosaurs. There's quite a few of them. We've even got what are probably Gigantoraptor nests, because the eggs are like 30, 40 centimetres, well, at least 30 centimetres long and 10 centimetres wide. They tend to be very, very long, kind of like pill shapes. But
I'm just expecting a stretched out kiwi right now, and it's actually a very small Oviraptorosaur.
But laid in a big ring with multiple layers. These are characteristic things of them.
So hang on, can we talk about their nests, or do you want to talk about that a bit later?
I'm not sure the nests are actually that interesting in the sense that...
But you just said that you could recognise them by the shape of their nests, which is an interesting secondary fossil, is it not?
So a lot of nesting theropods have this same pattern. The eggs are laid in a ring with a space in the middle where the animal was sitting, and they're often laid in pairs because they would have two ovaries and they would lay two eggs at a time. This is a fairly common thing, and there's usually 2 or 3 rings deep. And that is all very interesting, but you see it again and again and again, and there's not a lot to say after.
But I've never heard about this before, Dave, so to me that seems really, really weird.
I was sure we talked about this. Is the problem with talking to you endlessly about stuff, and then other people endlessly, and then writing books about it. I can't remember who I told what.
Okay, so I've got 2 ovaries, right? But they operate, but like one goes 1 month, another goes the other month, ping, ping. When I lay my eggs, right, I lay them one at a time.
Lots of clucking.
So are they laying eggs, and then they basically got a constant nest on the go?
Yeah, so modern birds, or at least a lot of modern birds, I can't speak for all of them because I don't know the bird literature that in depth, that they will often lay 1 egg a day, and they're developing eggs in a series, and you might get even kind of a big bag of them, and they're processing them one at a time. But again, modern birds are flying, or at least had flying ancestors. That has all kinds of weird constraints on their biology. Ancestrally, at least, obviously things like dinosaurs, and indeed things like crocodiles and other reptiles, tend to have 2 ovaries and will tend to produce eggs in both of them. We've got one Oviraptorosaur. I think it's at the American Museum of Natural History. I think Mark Norell and his team dug that up in the early 2000s, and it's got a pair of eggs inside it, because obviously they stick their calcium down at the last minute. This takes some doing, and the fact that there is a pair of eggs, not one, but there's two ready to go, really lines up with the fact that when we see some of these nests, the eggs appear to be in pairs. So it does look like they're probably generating 2 eggs a day for multiple days, but the fact that they are doing 2 at a time, whereas, again, anyone who's got chickens, no, they'll do 1 at a time, or 1 a day.
Well, exactly, and only if you treat them nicely, and occasionally they get a bit temperamental, and you got to feed them the right stuff, and apparently chili helps. Anyway, because they don't have chili receptors, they don't have the spicy
capsicum.
Anyway.
Yes,
exactly. So they'll do this seasonally, like annual, like they'll have an annual season.
Don't know. That this is all the classic unknown. How are we going to work it out?
Well, it could have been surrounded by Christmas cards.
Well, but so most animals are seasonal. Even things that lay eggs or give, or antelope and giraffe and stuff like this that live on the equator and basically don't really have a season at all, have a preferred time of the year where they tend to give birth. So I'd be very surprised if they weren't seasonal, particularly things in the desert.
And also, it's a lot of energy.
But we don't actually know.
It's a lot of energy to make eggs and lay them constantly.
Yes.
Yes. I think we kind of bred chickens to do it.
Well, yeah. More. I mean, yeah. You usually want your offspring to be hatching when there's maximum food availability, and you want them hatching at the same time as everyone else, so that the predators can't eat. If you're the only one with babies, the predators are going to eat all of yours. If everyone's had babies, they probably can't eat all of them, and some of yours will probably be all right.
Before all the ladies listening get annoyed with me, because some of the ladies will know people who've had twins, I am aware that humans are capable of releasing more than one
multiple
egg at a
eggs,
time.
yes.
Yeah, that's obviously non-identical twins. Identical twins is one egg that's done a weird
split
thing, I think.
Yes.
So just to clear up, I do understand some biology. So those are so they're laying 2 eggs at once. They not once, but near enough at once, and they have nests. And what else about them then? Sorry, they're a bit big and birdie-like.
After that, it starts getting, I think, a lot more interesting, or at least we could talk about the group more generally. So, as you said, they've kind of got weird beaky faces. Well, the oviraptors, as in there are broadly 3 groups within Oviraptorosaurus. Obviously, this is a very big group with that rather unwieldy name. The first group that branches off are things related to a little Chinese animal called Dictrix. We'll talk about that in a minute. And
say that again?
Dictrix.
Dictrix, okay.
So, cord, C-A-U-D, as in tail, and ipteryx, or pteryx, as in wing. So, tail wing, because they've got a little fan, almost like a mini peacock expansion on the end of the tail. So, you have the cord, I think they're called Dicteridae. It doesn't really matter.
Are they a bit like the pterosaurs we talked about last week, with the fan on?
Well, so this, jumping ahead. Let's sort out what our Oviraptorosaurs are, because again, they're a bit more of a mess than I think a lot of people realise. So you've got the Dictrix and kin, and we'll get onto them in a second. You've got the Caegnathids, a lot of which are pretty big. You've got some sizable animals, a thing called Anzu, which was named only a couple of years ago. That would have been, 2.5, 3 metres tall to the top of the head. Big animal. They've got a kind of duck-like beak at the front, so it's rather, it sticks out, and some of them have a very tall, thin, helmet-like top of the head. A lot like Corythosaurus, but of course I'm now just referring to another dinosaur, so if people don't know what Corythosaurus looks like.
I'm thinking more like a Gary Larson duck.
Yeah, pretty much, actually. not a million miles off. So you've got the Caegnathids, and then you've got the oviraptors, it's the oviraptor-like group. And they're the ones which I think you're probably thinking of, with this very truncated face, squashed in, almost rather parrot-like, with a rather downward-pointing beak that's often quite sharp. And some of them don't have weird head crests. Some of them have big, elaborate head crests with lots of weird holes in them, presumably because they were pneumatic to some degree. And there's lots of those knocking around as well. So you've got these 3 groups, and again, brackets possibly including Scansoriopteryges somewhere down the bottom. And they're famous for being beaky, but they're not all beaky. The earliest one, or the first branching group we know of, there's one animal called Incisosaurus.
As in sizes?
Yeah, it's got a big pair of, buck teeth sticking out the front. You see jokes about it called Bugs Bunny dinosaur or rabbit dinosaur. Genuinely, a pair of dirty great teeth out the front.
Which is much like Scansoriopteryges, a sort of Nosferatu too.
Which at least a few of them do. Yeah, exactly. So another reason that they might be down there. And a bunch of the later oviraptorosaurs, see, that's where you've got to be careful with names, and I fall into that. So some of the later oviraptorosaurs, can have big sharp beaks and then a pair of incisors behind them, or almost canine-like teeth. So kind of pointy little spikes. Just a pair often, so only a couple of teeth in the jaw, but they have got teeth and beaks. And that is weird. They're not the only things. All the ornithischians pretty much have a beak and teeth. And things like the theropods seem to have had a beak and teeth. But among theropods, generally, if you get a beak, you don't have teeth with it. But a couple of the oviraptorosaurs seem to have done that. And again, we've got this nice transition. Incisosaurus is just a skull, but an absolutely beautiful 3D one. So we know exactly what that looks like. So that's Incisosaurus, little thing, turkey-sized animal. And then we've got Dictrix knocking around with two of, I would contend, the worst named dinosaurs out there. And let's be honest, there are a lot of contenders for the title of worst named dinosaurs.
Other than I've learnt how to say Gigantoraptor, I would say that it took me a while.
Yeah, I know. And so we've got Dictrix.
I kind of think that's like a nerdy character in Asterix who wears great brown cords.
Nice.
Dictrix.
Dictrix got a bunch of nice specimens, lianing from China, flattened with feathers, so we know what it looks like. Kind of waist high to an adult human, smallish head, no crest, beak at the front, nice long thin neck, little body, relatively short tail with this little fan on the end, relatively long arms, which is something we see with the relatively bird-like ones, and would look like, almost a kind of miniaturized cassowary or something like that. Quite long neck, quite long legs, quite long arms. So that's what Dictrix looks like. And then they found another animal that was similar to Dictrix, and they called it Similar Dictrix. That's literally its name. SIMILACAUDIPTERYX. It's literally called Similar Dictrix because it's similar to Dictrix.
Like, we've brought up ladies with twins already. Now imagine if you had a baby and called it like Andrew.
And then Similar Andrew. Yeah. I know. So that's already an astoundingly badly named dinosaur. And there's another one which is definitely similar and either right around there or might actually be closer to Incisosaurus. And that was named Proto-Archaeopteryx, implying that it's like an ancestor to Archaeopteryx, despite the fact that it's far bigger and looks just like Dictrix and was clearly never part of that bird lineage. And these things are Cretaceous, so wouldn't have been an ancestor of Archaeopteryx, which is from the late Jurassic.
What?
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, like, you understood, in the mid-1900s and even earlier, they found things like Ceratosaurus, and then they found another little horned one, and they went, oh, that might be a forerunner, we'll call it Proceratosaurus. And we found this giant duckbill called Saurolophus, and we found another one that we think is related to it, we'll call it Prosaurolophus. But doing that in the 2000s, when we understand phylogeny and biogeography and temporal arrangements and evolution, it's pretty rotten.
I mean, you can get people's names in it if you wanted to, and you can call things like hell, heron, crocodile face.
I know.
Why would you call something?
So we've got Proto-Archaeopteryx and Similar Dictrix.
Oh,
I know.
Ugly.
Yeah, definitely.
If you can come up with a better name for these two animals, please write in. And Dave will suggest it in his next scientific meeting.
I was going to say don't, because anyone can come up with it. This is every listener we've ever had will write in now. But
I like male Dave. I like male.
Yes. Male Dave Dictrix. I mean, that's arguably better. So, but they're interesting in some ways. So, beaks, no teeth at this point, but gastroliths. I think these are the first convincing record we had of gastroliths.
Can I say, I think I know what a gastrolith is, and I don't think we've talked about it, so I can
No, I don't think we have, yeah.
Okay. A gastrolith, I believe, is something like a bezoar, so it'll be something swallows, a rock that something swallows to help them digest.
Yeah, if you, again, people say, scientists, use all these complicated terms, and yes, it helps if you know a little bit of Greek or Latin, but gastro, stomach, as in gastrointestinal or anything like that, and lith stone, as in lithography. Yeah, they're stomach stones. And obviously lots of birds have something like this. You've got to give your chicken and ducks grit, or finely ground eggshells and things like this, and they like eating them. They have a crop, so they have a special pre-bit of the stomach where these stones and gravel and things like that tend to sit.
And their neck.
Yeah, it's kind of at the base of the throat. And lacking teeth, that means that when they swallow seeds and grains and stuff like that, and they mash it all together against these stones, it will crush it up. It's basically a way of cheating and getting teeth if you don't have teeth. And Dictrix, we've got several specimens, and they got a big mass of stones right in the right place. We don't think they had a crop because it's a bit further down, and it's a rather bigger area, which suggests that they're just in the stomach. They hadn't evolved this special pre-bit, which we would call a crop, but they're still doing the same thing in the same way.
Could they have been mad and that's why they died? Could they have swallowed are these stones very... Because if they're jaggedy stones, then they could have just been mad.
So they're all nice so they're all really nice and smooth, which you'd expect if they'd been churning around. If they'd swallowed something that you shouldn't expect it to, even if they'd swallowed great mouthfuls of it, you'd expect it to be distributed down the tract and not just stuck in the stomach. And some nice work has been done. I'm not sure about those gastroliths, but certainly some others from other dinosaurs showing that the stones are not local to where the dinosaur was buried. So it's not like they washed into the mouth in the river or anything like that. They picked them up somewhere else.
My friend Owen, right, his last meal, he decided, because when you do those, pub discussions,
yes.
He says that his last meal he'd eat a lot of cheese and Lego heads, so that in the future, people look into his stomach and see lots of, and think, what sort of diets was this particular creature eating? Plastic Lego heads. Don't eat Lego heads, kids.
I know several people who want to do things like on their last legs eat lots of radioactive carbon or uranium to throw off all the radioisotopic dating and make them look much older or younger than they actually are. dig up some flint arrowheads or Neolithic hand axes. Take a load of carbon-14.
I think annoyingly, carbon dating is just completely useless for anything after sort of 1945
because of
when
the nuclear tests.
Bombs were dropping. Yeah.
But anyway, fun.
Don't swallow Lego heads or nuclear material, kids.
yes, or Neolithic hand axes.
Yes.
But I think Dictrix was the first really good evidence of this. So we've got herbivory in a theropod. That's already quite interesting. Gastrolith, that's quite interesting. Beak, that's quite interesting. We've got a relatively small oviraptor or oviraptorosaur, and one without any kind of head crest, which was kind of novel at the time, and then lots of feathers very well preserved. So Dictrix was a really, really cool find, and the fact that there's a whole bunch of them is really nice.
Can I distract you slightly with the head crests and ask, because I know Dictrix doesn't have one, but what were they like? So all I know is they were large and holy. Yeah,
so in shape they normally extend pretty much off from between the eyes, and they're a big kind of arch that then goes to the back of the head.
Some Tyrian helmets.
Yeah, pretty much. But in things like the caegnathids, so something like Anzu, it's almost a plate. It's quite thin. Whereas in stuff like, I think actually Oviraptor itself, it's pretty much the width of the entire head, and they've got quite boxy head, so it's quite wide. I think there's at least a couple where it sort of points forward a little bit at the top, so it almost crests and points anteriorly, which is rather neat. So they're doing some odd things.
What about their eyes? Because I know Triodontids, there's some Triodontids with very large eyes.
They've got pretty big eyes for their size. And then this feeds back into the diet issue, is actually what are they eating? So Incisosaurus we think is probably a plant eater that's got these big incisors and they're very flat. That looks like good for grabbing plants, and it's not really like any predator we've ever seen. And Dictrix and its relatives are almost certainly herbivores. I mean, they might be omnivores, but they've clearly got adaptations for grinding up seeds and stuff like this. So they're definitely not very carnivorous, even if they are omnivores.
Seeds or eggshells, Dave?
No, not at this point. And then the caegnathids, I really don't know much about caegnathids, though we found a whole bunch of them in recent years and there's been a lot of research on them. But as I say, I kind of call them duck-like beaks. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but they don't look particularly predatory. But as I said, at least some of the oviraptors, actually have a quite sharp pointy beak. And there's at least one specimen, which I believe has a lizard inside it, or at least bits of a lizard inside it. And I believe there's also a nest which has bits of a lizard inside it, which of course could have just died there, but could also have been brought back to the nest at some point. And that beak is pretty nasty and sharp. Now, of course, Triceratops has a very sharp beak because it's shearing through very tough vegetation. So a sharp beak does not necessarily a predator make, but it is at least plausible that some of these are either carnivorous or, kind of inverted commas, properly omnivorous. They're really eating quite a lot of plants and quite a lot of meat. But I don't think anyone really knows. And a bunch of them have some very odd jaw shapes. So I said the oviraptors have these kind of really short, boxy heads. The beak doesn't extend forward. It just kind of, their eyes and then the head just goes straight down.
Like you imagine an owl is, but isn't how an owl
Yes,
is.
pretty much. But with a bigger, more solid beak. But a lot of them have really big lower jaws. So they're really top to bottom, very deep and often quite thick, often with very big holes in them. Now there are holes in the jaws of dinosaurs, but a really big hole implies that you can actually pack quite a lot of muscle in there. And there's definitely been a debate about at least a few of these that have a very short head with a very deep jaw. And it's are they biting something really quite hard? Because if you have if you think about a pair of chopsticks, you can't apply much pressure at the tip. The longer something is, the harder it is to grip hard. There's pretty basic mechanics. One of the reasons T-Rex has a pretty short head, because it's got a really powerful bite. It's one of the reasons that things like Spinosaurs probably have a very long skull, because it's good for snapping quickly. You can basically have speed but not a lot of power, or power but not a lot of speed. And these look like the latter. And in this case, well then what are they eating? Are they crushing big, hard seeds?
I'm hearing everybody at home just screaming at me saying, "It's a beaver! That's what it is, it's a beaver!"
Not the ones living in deserts.
Well, they're frustrated beavers.
Yeah.
Or
very frustrated
nuts.
and very lost. Yeah, so there was a very early suggestion that they might be eating clams and things like this. Where we get nice riverbeds in these environments, there tend to be loads and loads of shellfish. I don't think there's any real evidence for that, but definitely there's been quite a debate around, are they fundamentally biting and eating hard things to break into? And that could well involve things like seeds and nuts. Once you get into the late Cretaceous, so most of the ones that we have, Dictrix and things like that, are early Cretaceous. The oviraptors and chaegnathids are mostly late Cretaceous. Oviraptor itself, I said, alongside Velociraptor. This is pretty near the end at this point. We've got oviraptorosaurs in environments with things like T-Rex and Triceratops. They're right up to the end. Flowering plants had really got going by this point. There would have been big seeds and nuts of various things knocking around. But again, those jaws might also be quite good at breaking small bones or, eating some other very tough foodstuffs, whatever that is. So they're this...
It might just be a way of killing something as well.
Well,
just holding
potentially,
onto it,
yeah. I mean, if you're going, we've seen that, eagles with very powerful beaks will just, slice through smaller things. You don't, some things do look a bit overpowered for what they're doing. If it's useful occasionally, they can still evolve it, even if it's not their usual diet.
Could it be sexual selection? Are big square jaws just attractive? Or is there a way that they're fighting each other that these could come in?
Probably not. So again, they've got some interesting things. They've got relatively long arms and they've got some fairly big claws on the end of those arms. Now, if you look at things like ornithomimosaurs, so we talked about ornithomimids before, other than a couple of early examples, they're probably all herbivores, beaky, very long-necked, little ostrichy heads. They still have big long arms with big claws on the end, but those claws are really flattened and not very curved and not very sharp, and there's no kind of power in the joints for giving them a good grip. They
just for show.
I wouldn't want to be swiped by one, but they're not really any kind of offensive or even really defensive weapon. A bunch of the oviraptors and chaegnathids or oviraptorosaurs in general look pretty nasty. They've got a real hook to them. They're not as extreme, not as good, let's say, as something like a dromaeosaur, but I'd say on average they're closer to dromaeosaurs than ornithomimosaurs. So are they predatory with these nicely hooked long arms? Or are they, fighting each other? Or are they doing something else?
Tying their shoelaces.
Well, that's
Probably not that.
Probably not that, but they're really quite neat. And so yeah, their diet as a clade, there's a whole bunch of them that I think we don't have a particularly good idea of what it is they're actually eating, or at least there's a whole bunch of possibilities, and narrowing it down is tough.
I have another theory.
Uh-oh.
Was it quite rocky and climby? Because could their beak and their claws be used for climbing?
Again, a lot of these are in a fairly flat desert, so it seems unlikely.
Digging? You don't use your beak to dig, would you?
Yeah, digging claws usually have a very different mechanic to them, and yeah, they don't particularly look like that. So yeah, they're quite funny in that regard. Going back to the sexual selection and the crests, though.
Can I say one more thing though about the claws and the beaks? Termites.
Well, remember you've got alvarezsaurs, so that is the niche that we think alvarezsaurs are filling, and we also don't think that there are necessarily nested termites back then. So there's two reasons I think that they're not doing that.
Okay, well, it's just like the alvarezsaurs might be going for the little nested termites, and the big nested termites who left no evidence of their existence.
Inconveniently.
They might require a more, beaky attack.
Possibly.
Do they have things in their mouths which suggest they have really long tongues that they could...
No big high eyes. You expect a long face generally, in fact. I mean, yeah you think like aardvarks, pangolins, anteaters, they tend to stretch, the numbats, they tend to have a long face. So, as I say, going back to crests and sexual selection and display and stuff like that, we need to go back to the tails. So, yeah, going back to Dictrix, lovely little fan on the tail, appears to be, almost literally like a Chinese fan, so a kind, or protractor, like half a circle. And we see this on most, if not all, specimens with good feather preservation, suggesting it's present in all of them. And there was an immediate idea that these things might be flapping these up and down and opening the feathers out or something like that and doing some kind of display. You can see this as far back as 2004. There's a famous book called The Dinosauria. In fact, there's been two The Dinosaurias. There was the first one from 1990 and then there was the second edition in 2004, and there's a new one allegedly coming soon. Allegedly, because it was supposed to be published about 3 years ago. And I know that as of only about 2 or 3 months ago, several people submitted their chapters, and those will still need review and rewriting and then typesetting, and then you've got to print it, and then you've got to distribute
it. We're like
it.
Aslan on this podcast. We call all times soon.
Yes, so don't hold your breath, people who are waiting for the Dinosauria 3. But the Dinosauria 2 from 2004, yeah, the front cover has a couple of little displaying oviraptorosaurs on it. In fact, Dictrix specifically. And yeah, they've got little fans and they're pushing up and displaying with them. And everyone's always been pretty happy with this idea. I should add, I didn't say this, Dictrix and a bunch of the other oviraptorosaurs have pretty short tails. By the standards of dinosaurs generally, they are short. Like, I'm now trying to think of something comparable. So, Dictrix, I'm doing this in my head with a ruler in front of me, I'd say its body length, as in like the actual torso, so, from the base of the neck to his bum, 20 odd centimetres. The tail is 10, 12.
Wow.
So short,
so
you think of
little Jack Russell tail.
Yeah, you think about a normal theropod and the tail is at least as long as the head and neck and body combined. Usually half the total length is tail. Obviously some have really long tails, some have relatively short tails, but it's about that length. We're talking less than half the length of the body alone. And some of them have extremely stubby tails, even shorter than that proportionally. They're very short indeed.
So we're getting to sort of Parsons nose bird type length.
The Avimimus, the bird mimic, but it's named for that because although all these things are of course very bird-like, in particular, it has a very, very short tail and the bones are fused together into what we call a pygostyle, which is exactly what you see in modern birds. So yeah, they have a very short tail indeed and it's fused. It's still not as exaggerated as modern birds, which have a massive reduction in the tail. But again, compared to almost any other theropod, indeed any other dinosaur, they're very, very short. And again, so does Epi Dextrix, near enough. So we've got another Scansoriopterygid character that's sitting around.
And are there birds at this time as well that which have a similar thing, or are these the basically bird branch?
I mean, Avimimus is bigger than Dictrix and not that much, so, kind of waist to chest high on a human, so they're absolutely terrestrial. There's no way these things are flying. But yes, by this time in the Cretaceous, the late Cretaceous, we have flying flying birds, which would be not indistinguishable from modern birds, but at first glance you'd really struggle to tell them apart. And yeah, at least some of those groups have shrunk the tail down. They actually did it several different times. Multiple different lineages went for short tails.
So why did they go for short tails? If you're going to display something, is it just because it's less weight to pick up because of leverage?
Well, I don't know. So this is this idea of like hyper adaptationism and the kind of every single thing in evolution has a purpose or does a thing or it evolved for that reason. And of course, that's not always the case. Some things just happen. It could be that the tails... We should do an
episode of evolution.
Yeah, we should. So it could be that tails shrunk in oviraptorosaurs for a completely random reason and they happen to have signals on their tails. It could be that the tail shrunk because it's part of the signal, but there's not really any way of knowing that. Remember, Dictrix is about as early an oviraptorosaur as we've got, and it's got a short tail with a fan on the end. So whatever evolution was doing that had pretty much already happened at this point.
There might have been a load of little dinosaurs that just annoyed other dinosaurs by pecking their tails, and it just so happened that the oviraptorosaurs had the shortest temper.
Yes.
That might be it.
Possibly. Because getting things to be more interesting. So when you get into the Cretaceous of Mongolia in particular, and also in China, oviraptorosaurs are pretty common. There's pretty large numbers of them. They're found in good numbers, which to my mind suggests that they're not carnivores. It would be odd if you found loads and loads and loads of carnivores everywhere, particularly when we've already got Velociraptor running around, as well as some bigger carnivores like Tyrannosaurs knocking about. Kind of odd if there's large number of niches for carnivores. You need some herbivores in that environment, more than just the odd Protoceratops. One of the things we have, so again, Citopati that we talked about on this, oviraptorosaurs, and there's a thing called Khan, Khaan.
Khan?
Yes, that you're not the first and you won't be the last to make that reference. Khan is known from quite a few specimens, including a pair found together, two, pretty much side by side. And Scott Persons, who we've mentioned before on the podcast, who's done various bits of work, including a paper with me on tail lengths, which is why I ended up recruiting Scott for that. Scott did a lot of stuff on dinosaur tails. On Tyrannosaurs and Carnotaurus and some other things, and looking at the musculature and the architecture and what that means for moving the legs and things like this. And Scott looked at these two and found that basically they were about as identical as they could be. You know, in other words, they are definitively basically the same species. They're found side by side. It'd be very odd if you found two almost identical species happen to die next to each other. There's no particular difference in the head or the beak or the eyes or the brain or the neck or the arms or the legs, except the tail. And one of them has some very odd joints in the tail, which would make it very good for flapping up and down. That's kind of what you'd expect if one of them was doing a big dance and maybe signalling to the other one, and that one was male and one was female. And so this is a rare example, I think, because we talked about sexual dimorphism before, and can you tell males from females? In this case, we don't know which would be the male and which would be the female, but they're basically the same thing. There's only one difference between them, and we think that's something directly connected to some kind of advert signal. That's pretty much what you'd expect from a male and a female pair together.
And there's no, mulligatawny bone.
Medullary bone.
Medullary. There we go.
No, not that I'm aware of, but I also don't think they've been sectioned for that. But that would be really nice if the non-tail one had, well, both got tails, but you know what I mean. If the non-display tail one had medullary bone and the other one didn't, but of course they probably don't, and that wouldn't necessarily tell you anything anyway.
Yeah, but it'd be cool. As well as obviously the tail feathers being used for display, what's the other feathers being used for? I presume very basic, boring things like heat preservation. Yeah,
they're going to be the usual things that we think of, which is they're pretty good for keeping the heat in. That also means they can be good for cooling yourself. So yeah, we should usually talk about temperature regulation more than insulation. Of course, insulation can cut both ways. So that's one. Almost certainly for signalling, as usual, as we've talked about, you can do some interesting thing for feathers that you can't with skin. You can shed your feathers to completely replace them and change colour and do things like this. It's perfectly possible that they're doing that. You can make some interesting colours in feathers that you can't with skin, potentially related to them signalling. Remember, feathers have been around for a good long while at this point. So they've had some opportunities to evolve some interesting things.
Have they got things like quill knobs and stuff?
So I don't don't know if they do. I can't think of any that have, but I can imagine that a couple do.
The thing is, in my head, they won't be running particularly fast because they haven't got much of a tail to sort of help them with the running, which is why I think they're climbing with their face.
Well, so as I say, the tail is not with the exception of actually Epi Dextrix. Again, the tail is not as reduced as we see in modern birds. So though that tail is unusually short, and that would have some implications for how you arrange the leg muscles, and because we talked about that, and usually a big long tail has a big long muscle on it, they'd have been pretty quick animals, definitely. I mean, these are going to be running around fast. I think oviraptorosaurs generally are considered one of the faster dinosaurs. Ornithomimids are right up the top. Young tyrannosaurs are very quick, but I think oviraptorosaurs in general are going to be in that same kind of ballpark. They've got nice long legs. At least a few of them show adaptations for efficient running. So these pinched metatarsals that we talked about, which are in tyrannosaurs and in troodontids and in alvarezsaurs and in orthomimosaurs, turn up in a couple of oviraptorosaurs as well. So you're going to be quite a good runner to have pulled that out.
And that's because presumably they're being hunted or they're hunting. We can't
well,
tell
or just getting around. You know, again, if you're in a desert environment where food is few and far between, being quick and efficient to get from point to point is a useful thing.
Meep, meep.
But the last thing to go back about feathers, so one really interesting thing that oviraptorosaurs gave us, and I think it's actually similar core Dictrix that gave us this, there's a juvenile known with feathers and an adult known with feathers. And the juvenile has thin, simple filaments, and the adult has, inverted commas, proper feathers. So exactly like we see in modern birds, where chicks have simple filaments and then they molt and turn into the adult plumage, we see the same thing. So that is present well before the origin of true birds, if it's all the way down in the oviraptorosaurs. So that's another really cool thing we got from this group.
That is cute as. And they may, like, there's bits of Canada which bump into Scotland, so I think there may have been, there probably weren't. I'm trying to link to our guest.
Yeah, nice try.
Even though, I mean, she's famously Scottish, even though she doesn't have the classic Scottish accent. She is one of Scotland's great comedians. Her name is Eleanor Morton, and here she is on our podcast. Eleanor, thank you very much for coming on Terrible Lizards, the podcast about dinosaurs, of which, I don't know, do you have you got any experience or background with dinosaurs? Do you like dinosaurs? Are dinosaurs a part of your life?
I guess my connection is my dad is an ornithologist, and what I've been led to believe is that they are tiny little dinosaurs, or huge, or big, huge dinosaurs. But they are I think they're the closest living. Is that right? The closest living, or
they are literally dinosaurs. Yeah. So yes.
So there you go. So that's my So
that's a good connection.
I know a lot about birds, and randomly through osmosis. Random facts, and I've seen a lot of them, so that's my connection, I guess.
So you didn't want to follow your father into the ornithological footsteps?
It involves a lot more dead things than you think it might. It's not all it's not all Springwatch. There's he used to have to, because he worked in investigations with the RSPB, he used to have to bring home poisoned raptors and keep them in the freezer until he could take them to the lab. So you didn't want to open the freezer sometime. You didn't know what was going to be in there. So also it was just hard work. It's just hard work, and I'm lazy, so yeah. I
think it's a pretty common phenomenon. I teach biologists, and lots of them want to go into, things like conservation, which is, of course, an excellent thing to go into. But I think when they arrive at university, they think it's like, I'm going to go to Africa, and I'll be riding around in the back of my Land Rover with my binoculars, watching the lions. And it's like, no, mostly you'll be looking at dismembered gazelle and bits of lion poo. And if you see a lion, you've had really quite a good month.
Or a very important species of moth that looks incredibly boring.
Yeah.
or tormenting your daughter by filling her fridge.
Her freezer with her.
She goes in for a froob, and there's Kez. Dead Kez.
Kez, a lot of Kezes. There was a badger one time. I think that was in the garage, actually. That was too big for the freezer.
I think that's at the point that you suggest to your dad that his knowledge of birds isn't very good. Found this very bizarre hawk.
It's a broad spectrum, birds, and then anything a bird can see. That's really what they cover.
So do you have any, therefore, dinosaur questions for, because we've got a paleontologist here who's like your dad, lab, except even more obsessed with dead things.
Yeah, but can I first ask that you can cut this out if this ages it? Are you excited about this Digging for Britain find that they had the other night, or is this not? Is this a different area and therefore you're like rivals with these people?
Is it a dinosaur, Dave? It's not a dinosaur, is it?
It's not. That's what I was going to ask.
It's an ichthyosaur, which magnificently the BBC called, what was it?
Sea dragon.
Sea dragon dinosaur dolphin fossil, which was just a magnificent hodgepodge of descriptions. I think that lasted about half an hour, and then they had to change the headline. So yes, it's an ichthyosaur, so a marine reptile that lived alongside dinosaurs but was not a dinosaur. I haven't seen much of it, as in I haven't looked at the articles and stuff that's come out. It's massive, though. It's something like 10 metres long. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, found in the UK. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it wasn't one of the biggest found in Europe. I know there are bigger ones out there. There's one in Canada.
Everything's bigger in Canada.
Even bigger. Well, yeah, it's the North America thing. But yeah, one that size, that complete, in that good condition are very few and far between in the UK, even though we have a huge amount of ichthyosaurs. We get loads of ichthyosaurs in the UK. So yeah, it's really a hell of a find. But I don't really care about ichthyosaurs. That's the honest truth.
Sea dragon did sound more exciting than it looked. I would say angry dolphin is the best. For someone who's not familiar, maybe. That's what I was getting.
I don't know, dolphins can get pretty angry if you consider killer whales are actually angry dolphins.
That's very true, yeah. Good point.
Well, dolphins have some other interesting proclivities with swimmers as well, which we shouldn't discuss in front of certain
That's
ears.
love, not anger, though, I think.
I've got my question.
Okay.
One bit of them's angry.
I got my question.
We were both discussing before you joined us on the call. We were thinking she's going to ask us about the Loch Ness monster, isn't she? She's Scottish.
That's what you said.
That was my bet. I thought it would be Loch Ness monster all the way, and you were like, yeah, but you said her dad's like, ornithology type fan.
No, I said she'd ask, are there any Scottish dinosaurs? But she didn't.
Oh, I could ask that. I mean, I'm just trying to think of apart from Nessie, any other potential, because what is she meant to be, a plesiosaur, and that's also not a dinosaur, is it?
Yeah, that's the general the convention of the what everyone looks at is a plesiosaurus.
Thank you. Light lizards.
Have they found any? There's actually quite a few loch monsters. It's not just Nessie. So there's lots of other myths and legends.
There are in various places, and I don't know them as well as I used to. I used to know my way around some of those. Kelpies, that's the Irish one?
No, that's Scottish, but it's more like it's like a water horse. So it's like a wet horse, really. Yeah.
So a seahorse, for example.
Yeah,
you could always call it. Yeah.
But one that tries to kill children on purpose. So.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds useful.
There's a loch, so just along, probably miles away from Loch Ness, called Loch Mora, and there's a theory, obviously not a particularly sound one, that because monsters have been seen there, it's the same one, and it has some kind of underwater tunnel that it goes between the two.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, God. People will stretch. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I quite like that idea of it's the same one.
Here's two ludicrously unlikely things. Let's link them together to make a third, even more unlikely.
Just one wants to go all over Scotland, and she's absolutely knackered.
This huge network of tunnels.
So, am I right in thinking that a lot of Scotland is made of? This is sort of more geography. Made of bits of Canada bashing into bits of Europe. So
you're asking someone who is a biologist by background, not a geologist. But yes, there's what is it? Isle of Skye, I think, is so. Almost every geology undergraduate course in the UK, they go to the Isle of Skye because yes, it's basically got all the bits of Canada and Newfoundland and all the bits of the UK and Europe in it. It is a little bit of both plates stuck together. It's the one place you can send the students and basically do everything in one go.
What are the dinosaurs in Scotland then?
So stupidly I didn't look this up despite having predicted that this would be your question. I can't think of any skeletons that we found in Scotland for dinosaurs, but it does have quite a good amount of fossil footprints for dinosaurs.
Okay, so they walked around, but they didn't die there.
They didn't die in the right conditions.
I'm pretty sure there must be, because we have got mammals. I know there's a pterosaur knocking around, which is due to be described soon, and pterosaurs are very rare. There's all kinds of fish and other things. So you've got lots of skeletons of the right age. It would be ridiculous if there weren't dinosaurs. I just can't think of any. But I do know Scotland has a bunch of really good dinosaur footprints, covering most of the big groups. So yeah, there's sauropods, big-bodied, long-necked things. There's theropods, the carnivorous bipedal things. There's ankylosaurs, armoured dinosaurs. I think there's stegosaur footprints as well. So there's really quite a lot.
Nice range.
Footprint. If you want dinosaur footprints in the UK, the Isle of Wight and the South Coast are quite famous for it. Actually, they're mostly not very good. There's a lot of iguanodon and not much else. I think on average, Scotland is rather better for dinosaur
It's getting political now.
Well, unless of course you want a good Spinosaur. We've got loads of baryonyx and their friends.
Well, we have. We've got our Spinosaur body fossils down south.
Good thing I don't want that.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
We used to do lots of holidays on the Jurassic coast. Never found anything. That's a terrible anecdote.
You must have found like some ammonites and belemnites.
Those little ones that look like bullets.
I think my brother did.
The ones that look like bullets are calling them pebbles down there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did. I think I just never picked them up. I think once I found out what ammonites were, it freaked me out a bit. I'm not very good with anything like a crawly.
Squid.
Yeah, squid things, yeah. We must have done. But is that where they found this one, or is that the big sea dragon, or is that in...
The new one's Rutland. So,
okay, Rutland.
It's up in the Midlands. But I believe it's the same genus as some stuff that's been found down on the South Coast by Mary Anning, so back in the early 1800s.
Have you seen the new film, Izzy?
I have not seen the new film, but I gather there's some people kissing in it, and I thought that's
very steamy.
That's too much for me. I don't like. I like my historical fiction without any romance.
Yes.
Lots of real stuff and no romance.
Facts, not feeling.
Yeah.
What I've heard is it contains a lot of fictional romance and very little actual history. Not even the paleontology,
really
just history.
Disappointing its potential key audience there.
Well, pretty much. I mean, it's
by trying to appeal to the broader public, they've really...
No, I know, but it's one of those things where it's like I don't think anyone who is into history or anything like that has ever seen any feature film which is really accurate. That just doesn't exist. But Mary Anning is basically famous for finding loads of fossils and having struggles against poverty and getting people to accept her ideas and knowledge and understanding and being rejected by science. And my understanding is basically none of that is in the film at all. And it's based entirely around a fictional romance, which we have no evidence for whatsoever. Which seems a bit of, isn't this the reason people have heard of her?
Tom Holland, by the way, the famous historian, he thinks that a really accurate historical film is the film 300 about the Spartans. Even though that contains a 12-foot Xerxes, he says that actually that is pretty much bang on how the Spartans saw themselves, because they were basically fascists, and it's a really fascist film.
Because they're basically lunatic,
Gerard Butler's I haven't seen
Gerard Butler.
He's that guy,
I can only ever say his name in his own voice because that's how it comes.
Apparently, I don't know, Izzy, you seem like you might know this fact, but apparently the reason, not necessarily the reason he chose them, but coincidentally, Spartans are often given Scottish accents in Greek translations because it's like Sparta's the crazy wild bit of Greece, so they're the Scottish one.
Well, they're sort of like they're the ones who sort of murdered their slightly disabled looking children or ones that couldn't see and didn't let them grow up.
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah, you do. They're tough. So, I mean, we laugh at them.
Tough.
That might have been a Roman thing, because the Roman emperors used to come to the UK just so they could fight Scottish people. It's how you proved yourself as a general, was you got sent to England and got to deal with the Scots for a little bit, and then you were seen
how
really
far
tough.
up could you get?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the way you prove yourself.
Can I suggest that the phrase "deal with the Scots" might be slightly euphemistic?
To be fair, the Scots did deal with the Romans too.
Oh God, it's all getting out of hand. Dinosaurs.
Yes, dinosaurs. But that's a bit later than
Did any of them have feathers?
Did any have feathers?
Yeah,
loads.
I thought as soon as I asked, I was like, I'm pretty sure they did actually. Yeah. I really want to picture a T-Rex as like just a fluffy, like big bird with tiny.
T-Rex is slightly less, we think. anything.
I know.
I mean, that's one that goes round and round and round. And it's like almost every...
Tell her about Tyrannus, Dave. I just want to make her happy. It'll make her so happy.
So Tyrannus is a tyrannosaur. It's a fair bit smaller than T-Rex, but the big ones were still 7-8 meters and 3/4 of a ton.
It's big enough for me.
And they were as floofy and feathery and big birdy as you like. So there were giant predatory floof tyrant things.
Fun.
And we know that because they've got like a couple of them together, and if you look at the image of them, they leave this.
Oh, they're just feathers.
It's just this line of fluffy feathers, like really long ones, all the way over them. So they would have been proper Sesame Street kind of like, except killers.
It's funny because when you look at like ostriches and condors and stuff, you do like see that you forget they're dinosaurs, and then you look at their, you know, these massive, and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely a dinosaur.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at ostrich wings on the inside, they have big claws on their fingers.
Yeah,
which people don't realise, and their feet are pretty
stompy.
Yeah,
stompy as well. Yeah.
But even tiny garden birds as well, their movements are very like. I mean, I'm just basing this. Yeah, I'm basing that on films I've seen about dinosaurs, because obviously I've never seen a dinosaur, but
you've seen garden birds. They count.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But that, you know, there's videos. I think there's that video. It's done the rounds repeatedly, so it's not hard to find, of like a cat chasing a mouse in some farmyard or someone's garden, and the mouse runs past the chicken, and the chicken just is straight on it and just gulps it down in one go, gone.
Yeah.
And it's like, like
don't mess with that.
They do that. Yeah.
What about? I mean, Eleanor mentioned the jerky movements. Just if we've got a moment, I'm just interested in that because lots of little birds, and also, you know, some of the bigger raptors seem to have that sort of like kind of, you know, lizard-like movement.
Well, they've got this. What they've really got is this massive head stabilization. So again, there's some really cool videos on this online that people have done over the years. And what's his name? Weeble, who does those
Weeble
quirky videos. Yes, the guy who did Weeble and Bob.
Yeah.
He's got a song called "Rotate Your Owl" with this wonderful old video of what looked like Soviet scientists with an owl wrapped up in cloth doing this demonstration of bird head stabilization. And then, yes, he's done this remix track called "Rotate Your Owl" over the top, which I watch repeatedly. But it's a great example of basically they have this wonderful little, I won't describe the detail because I don't understand it, but basically loop of nerves in their brain, basically connecting their ear, because obviously that's what gives you stability, is your inner ear tells you, you know, where is your level, which is why when you get dizzy, you feel sick and things like this, or why you get seasick. And basically those are linked to their neck muscles, so that basically if their body moves at all, their head will remain stable in space. And the extreme versions of this is, yes, you can pick up an owl, or there's someone else who's got a nice video of a chicken, and you can just jerk it up and down and swing it all over the place, and the head doesn't move a millimeter.
Well, I want that. I get so car sick. Why didn't we evolve that? It's much better than.
Well, probably I think because they were flying, and remember, even though we've got things like ostriches now which are flightless, their ancestors were flying. And if you're flying around, you really want a stable head. If your head is constantly moving while you're trying to negotiate flying between leaves and stuff in trees, you're going to crash all the time. So you can soon see how evolution sorted this out.
So therefore you'd say that Archaeopteryx probably had a similar type thing, as it might have been flapping about a bit. But
how good was it and how quick did it kick in?
Yeah, but things like T-Rex and other, you know, theropods which didn't have that flight. Might have.
I don't think they'd have had it personally. It's not such a big deal. You know, we don't have that. You know, when we're walking along, you know, our heads go up and down.
Yeah.
If you watch video, swans are really good for this. Swans when they fly. So there's basically a couple of different ways of flying in terms of how you move your wings, particularly as a bird. So a problem that you have if you fly as an animal that you don't have as a plane, for example, is planes stick thrust out of the back and their wings just generate lift. Their wings don't move, they're static. Birds have to generate lift and thrust from their wings, which means their wings need to move. Now, what you really want to do to generate thrust is to flap your wings from top to bottom, pushing air down and keeping you up. The problem is your wings are now at the bottom and you need to get them back up to the top. And if you did the exact same action again, all you're doing is thrusting air up and pushing yourself down.
Okay.
So if you watch those comedy videos of people trying to build dreadful flying machines in the 1800s, they built them with wings that just flapped up and down. And what happens? The whole machine just goes up and down because they go uplift, downlift, uplift, downlift, uplift, downlift, and all they do is bounce. Now, one thing that swans do is they actually sacrifice quite a lot of that up. By when they return their wings up, they don't fold them fully. So they are doing that exact problem of now generating a lot of kind of negative force that would push them back down. So if you watch a video, actually you can just watch a swan flying, but for anyone who doesn't happen to have a swan flying past them, as I just was like, watch a video of swans flying and you'll see their whole body bobs up and down with every wing stroke, because that's that problem of negative and positive lift and thrust happening with every single wing stroke. And what happens? Their head stays rock still as their body oscillates above and below it. This is a very long-winded answer, but that goes into it. And as you going back to your original point, Eleanor, all those videos you see of dinosaurs being very good at this is because everyone's gone, oh, dinosaurs are just like birds, so we'll do what birds do and give them this hyper-stable head with the body moving around behind it. And I really don't think they probably did that.
Okay, so you think they...
I think they'd be like us, or like most things, which is if you're particularly as a quadruped, it's easier to be stable because you've got multiple legs. But as us as bipeds, particularly when we're running, you've got both feet off the ground, your head goes up and down.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible.
Because we hold on heads. If we held our heads down, you could probably do it because then you've got a bit of give.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be possible. Most dinosaurs, particularly the carnivores, which were running around faster and were bipeds, most of them had fairly long necks and would hold it out in front. That gives them some flexibility, so maybe they could. But I don't think from a natural selection point of view, it's anything like as important as it would be for flyers, and therefore it may well have just never evolved in them.
So is that official confirmation that dinosaurs would have gotten seasick on a P&O ferry?
Specifically.
Wow, I mean, that's...
Certainly on a catamaran.
Perfectly possible.
Because I even think seagulls get sick on a catamaran.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anything, a P&O ferry is between Dover and Calais. It's the perfect amount of time to start feeling seasick and then not have time to adjust your sea legs and then get off feeling sick. So that's how I measure it.
That's a good measure. I think if
scale,
I think when you write your paper, I think you need to get, would dinosaurs get seasick on a P&O ferry? I think we've got a title for the episode, so that's good.
I've done worse crossing the Irish Sea. I've got pretty sick. Oh God,
yeah, I bet.
Because it's so much rougher. It's a shorter journey, but
I've only flown to Shetland, thank God, because I've seen the videos of the boat to Shetland. It looks horrific.
Oh, there was some video doing the rounds the other day, and I went to show it to someone, and then I couldn't find it anywhere. And it was a camera that was fixed in a bridge of some freighter a proper storm. Yeah. And like this guy comes in, and he does this 3 or 4 times, and then he grabs hold of the back of the chair and then literally just ends up in a Superman position and then comes back down and then pulls himself into the chair, and you're like, what is the wheel going to do at this point? And his ship is going horizontal.
Horrible. That's a sick one. And the T-Rex couldn't even do that because they got little
arms. Nothing to hold on with.
They're not going to be. There's alas no dinosaur pirates, which
very true. Yeah, one of history's greatest crossovers.
Well, they're never going to be able to put an eye patch on, are they? I mean, it's
pretty sad.
Yeah, I mean, there are dinosaur pirates, because obviously parrots. What am I talking about?
Yeah,
parrots selected specifically by seamen in general because they don't need much water. They eat grain, and therefore they're perfectly adapted for a life at sea. Whereas a dog needs a lot of meat, and meat doesn't stay fresh. Needs a lot of water, not rum. They don't like rum.
No,
they get sick as a dog.
Hassle.
I've got an old Punch cartoon somewhere with a couple of pirates talking, and one says to the other, "Of course, he's been very quiet since the accident. He's got a parrot on his shoulder, and he's got a hook for a head."
There you go.
Yeah, I just think about that though. That is a dinosaur pirate.
Well, it's a dinosaur pirate.
Yeah.
So it's your dad is sort of a paleontologist just for extant dinosaurs.
Yeah, he's retired now. He's having a great.
Okay, so he's
watching the Great British Dig or whatever it's called, Digging for Britain.
Digging for Britain. I've not been.
It's something like that, something patriotic.
Yeah, I was sure you were going to say the Great British Bake Off. There.
It's one of those titles where it's like something cozy that's that's meant to make us all feel united.
COVID and Brexit isn't happening type thing.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's good.
Comfort telly.
Talking of comfort and distractions, Eleanor, tell us all of the things that we should check out of your stuff. That's.
I don't know if any children should check out any of it.
No. Well, we're going to say not for children. She's a grown woman, even though she's
not for children, guys. I do a lot of kids comedy actually, but I can't think of anything specific that's coming up. So.
Fair enough.
You can find me online on all of the usual places.
What's your handle?
It is at Eleanor Morton. And sometimes it's at Eleanor Morton Comedy. But I think if you Google either of those, you'll get there.
Cool.
I'm doing the Leicester Comedy Festival in February. So if you're in Leicester, come to that.
This will be coming out in February, so that's perfect. A massive thank you there to Eleanor Morton. Just Google her, but it's at Eleanor Morton. You'll find her. And like I say, she's at the Leicester Comedy Festival this week. So go and get your tickets if you are in or about Leicester. So, oviraptorosaurs, we don't think, going by your theory, that only flying things would have had the neck thing. They wouldn't, even if they're really speedy and you want to keep your, as level as possible. So you like.
Well, as I said to you after recording that bit, I'm like, maybe they do have it, but no, I've thought I haven't looked it up, but the more I think about it, I mean, obviously, animals that are doing that kind of thing will have some kind of head stabilization or vision stabilization. You know, we can run quite quickly and still like read signs and things like this, but we are bouncing around a fair bit.
If you've ever wanted to do a bit of footage and you've walked with your phone and then you've walked with somebody and seen a Steadicam, it's like, that's magical. How do you?
Yeah.
Because it really is. I'm amazed about how much my head bobs up and down, but I don't notice it. Is that just because I'm stupid? Does my brain block it out, like my blind spot?
No, I think your brain is just compensating. Yeah, in the same way that it covers up for blind spots and your blood vessels and all kinds of other things. Your brain is a massive liar, and what you're seeing isn't actually what you're seeing.
What?
Oh, you know you can make clocks go backwards. I've never been able to do this. If you Google it, this is absolutely a thing. You can. I know people who say they can do it. You basically, if you start watching a clock with a second-hand tick, your brain is filling in bits of what it thinks is happening. And if you basically get the timing right and look away and look back, the clock will go backwards because your brain will fill into where it thinks the hand is, not where it actually is. And it will tick backwards for a second and then forwards again.
That explains a lot. We're such liars. I'm now concerned. See, I get confused between 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock, but I think that's just me.
Similarly, you can do if you make a pinhole. So if you curl your index finger up, so it's an absolute pinhole, and you look through it and stare at something nice, not like a light, but something quite bright, like a white wall, and jiggle it like absolutely, the finest tiny jigglings that you can do.
Oh yeah.
You'll start seeing your blood vessels in your own eyeball.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
Yeah,
you can also there are certain stages in as a comedian where if you stand and the light gets and you can see the blood vessels in your eye,
really,
and that's all you can see. Yeah, and you've got to be like, hey, this is normal. We're doing stand-up comedy. All I can see is the inside of my own eyeball in detail. Yeah. Just because it gets it at oh, it's horrible. But yeah, having your blood vessels in front of your vision centres is not good.
Yeah, as we'll discuss again on a podcast that's not coming out yet.
Oh, will we? Fantastic. Let's do that then. Okay then. Well, I think that's all the questions. If you've got more questions that you want us answering about oviraptorosaurs in general, we didn't really talk about how they're like Gigantoraptorids, did we? Other than they've got the weird beaky face and the weird fanny tail. Well, no, Gigantoraptorids have the ruler tail. They don't even have.
So Epi Dextrix, has a very short pygostyle like tail, and then these big fan-like, just 4 solid ribbons, but what we think is a display feature. They've got these similar arm structures, and then they've got these short heads with the Incisosaurus like teeth. So there are a bunch of little features there that are pretty much.
But they're bigger.
No, they're much smaller.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I thought Gigantoraptorids were quite wee. So
they are.
So we're talking like tiny.
You said they, and of course I don't know which of the two theys you were talking.
Both.
So Epidexit. So none of the Gigantoraptorids, to my knowledge, are full grown. Certainly Epi Dextrix herbivorous is absolutely tiny and clearly a young juvenile. Epi Dextrix is like about the size of a squirrel, just with a short tail.
Yeah.
So not that big. That's not an adult, but I would say it's getting on for adult size. It doesn't necessarily have much growth more to come. But the smallest oviraptorosaurs that I know of, things like Incisosaurus and Dictrix, are, as I say, kind of turkey goose size. So quite a bit bigger.
Yeah.
But still small in the dinosaur scheme of things, but much bigger than a big squirrel-sized dinosaur.
Cool.
He said comparing squirrels with geese, because that's the obvious size category.
That's the obvious, but the thing is, we're British, and this is the animals in our local environment.
Yes.
The trouble is you can't say rabbit, because a rabbit can get to the size of a house these days. Anyway.
Yeah, Flemish giants. Aren't they great? I'd love one of those.
Sorry to talk about rabbits, everybody.
And Belgian hares are nice. Yeah, I like my rabbit breeds. What are you going to do?
He's a rabbit fan. All right then, ladies and boys and girls, if you have any questions about rabbits or dinosaurs,
or lagomorphs generally,
please do write into us. It is terriblelizardspod@gmail.com, or you can go to our patrons. Big thank you and high five to all the patrons on our Patreon. You guys are awesome, and we will be back. What?
I'm giggling because I'm now planning on doing a special episode called Terrible Lagomorphs, where I just talk about rabbits.
Oh god!
Not sure anyone would listen except me, but who cares?
I think you'd get a few fans. And those fans, Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, until next week. Rawr!
I was going to do a rabbit noise, but of course there isn't anything to do.
Well, you can sort of go Don't they scream?
No, well, they do a bit, but yeah, like nose whiffling is the kind of standard rabbit noise, but of course that's basically silent.
Okay, nose whiffle.
Thank you for listening to the Terrible Lizards podcast. To support the show, share this episode and leave us a review, especially with dinosaur emojis, on your app of choice. You can also become a patron on patreon.com/Terrible Lizards, where you will be rewarded with extra content. For more information about Dave and Izzy and our books, other podcasts and blogs, please visit terriblelizards.co.uk. We hope to keep making this content, and it's down to your support that we do, so thank you.